Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Defense Disrupted. My name is Ian Kalin. I'm joined today by a much more successful podcast co-host, Ed Padinsky, call sign Pad-Eye. Welcome to the stage. Before we introduce our main event, would you like to say a brief hello to everybody, Pad-Eye?
Always great, Ian, to join you in this little journey. I'm super excited about our guest today. I've heard some things about him. I hope some of them are true.
Well, the reason, that's exactly why we brought you to this podcast, because the only reason I've met this extraordinary individual is because of you. You introduced me to him. And with that, I will afford no more filler. Let me just talk about the gentleman we're about to speak with today. The U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Bob Sharp will be joining us today. Over a distinguished 34-year career, he served in multiple leadership roles throughout the Department of Defense, including the 7th Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency.
007.
Oh, that's actually pretty good. I didn't think about that. That's a mark of
I had
fame.
that in congressional testimony, by the way.
We don't have to defend ourselves to Congress today, thank goodness. But I think you've seen a number of interesting things over your career. I understand you have some interesting roots in Northern California that may bring us some common crossroads. But I have a hunch that folks like Pad-Eye have seen you out in the field as well, and has brought some field witness to the respect that you've earned throughout your extraordinary career. We'll start with some question in that regard, and it's really inspired by Pad-Eye. Throughout your diverse roles of leadership, this is a leadership question I'm going to start with. We tried to find dirt on you, sir. We tried to find examples of like, oh, everyone's got some blemish in their career. And what seems to come up in our diligence, not just for you as a professional advisor, but as a leader, is that everywhere you go, you seem to have instilled a sense of trust, even from a very diverse set of stakeholders at every echelon of your career. So the leadership question that hopefully applies to all of our listeners, any reflections as you look back, and of course, feel free to share your own story. How did you instill trust in so many diverse teams that by their very nature are highly skeptical and distrusting?
Yeah, I probably did it without knowing it, is the honest answer. But Ed and I go way back, just so everybody, people know. Lieutenant Sharp and Ensign Padinsky sailed together on the USS Constellation as part of Air Wing 2, the best squadron in the Air Wing. So we have known each other indeed like our whole careers, and our careers continue to cross paths, throughout the years. And we both have later in our careers some special operations support time concentrated specifically after 9/11 and the attacks, which was a formative experience for us and many others. But one of the great special operations force truths, soft truths that I love is you can't surge trust. Second only to my favorite soft truth, which is humans are more important than hardware. And maybe we'll discuss that at some point. But the trust aspect is, that really encapsulates it. You can't trust, you can't surge it. You have to earn it over time. And what I find is being genuine and consistent and persistent, and then possessing, hopefully, leadership one of the leadership characteristics that I admire most and is sometimes overlooked or underappreciated is caring. Like being a leader that cares, instills trust. So I am honored and pleased to know that Ed thinks, or that you guys think in your searches, that I'm someone who has garnered trust.
Oh, well, it wasn't just him, sir. We asked around. Like, I don't believe everything Pad-Eye says to me, to be clear. But we were asking around, and it's kind of funny what a brand is. If you ask my wife or my kids, how would they describe me? Like, it's not always the same word. And when we asked for words about you, that word came up, and the word cloud 10 times more than any other. And so I was like, that's kind of an interesting, reputation in and of itself.
I've been Google stalked before, but I didn't know I'd been word clouded.
I mean, we humaned on you, sir. We're not gonna. We do our diligence in this podcast, even if we don't read it until seconds before we press record.
I thought you were gonna go here with this story too, Ian. When hey, we tried to search and there wasn't much about you. A quick side story: when I was taken over as the 7th Director of NGA, there was some press in the audience. I was taken over from Robert Cardillo, and after there was a number of articles that came out, mainly focusing on Robert Cardillo's time as director of NGA. But one reporter said, well, I guess I should say something about the new guy, Vice Admiral Sharp. And he said, "Not much is known about this individual," which is always good when you're an intelligence.
Whoa.
And then he said, but he appeared, well, sharp and genuinely enthusiastic and excited about taking over. And then he also made a statement like he spoke in full sentences. And I could never live that down with my kids. For a long time, they would just say, "Well, Dad, you do speak in full sentences."
Man, I thought the bar of credibility would be higher, but now I have higher aspiration that that's all I need to achieve if I seek to get to that level of success. Well, let's talk more about, maybe let's dig into that background and the roots of what has led you to so many roles of leadership. I'm going to turn it over to Pat I here, who may have some memories about some of the aspects of what he's seen out in the field.
And just so people know, we've known each other for long and we have well-established MAD, mutually assured destruction.
This is true. We know skeletons in each other's closets, and it's a good thing. That also imbues a certain level of trust from a different viewpoint, I think. So yeah, I mean, I'll tell the story of Bob and I met as Bob mentioned, in our first air wing. I was a squadron air intelligence officer. Bob was the air wing targeteer, and for perspective for the audience, an air wing targeteer is typically an O3, maybe second or third tour, but has a tremendous amount of responsibility given kind of that rank and experience level. And so I got to meet Bob. I think he picked me up from the Reno airport. We're on our way to an air wing detachment training. You end up going through these with the air wing prior to deployment for about 4 to 6 weeks or so, dropping bombs, doing the full spectrum of intelligence work, from collection to planning to briefing support and all kind of other things, debriefing, but making sure the right bombs hit the right targets. Well, Bob picks me up from the airport. Never met him before. I think I had one phone call before that. And he said, "Oh, by the way, we need to stop on the way back to my house at Fallon." Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know what this is going to be about. Well, we ended up stopping at a brewery supply place so that Bob could make beer for the air wing while they were out there. We would make it beforehand and then drink it as a celebration at the tail end. And I thought it was just like a cool little tradition. Like, I'm going to like this sharp guy thing.
Well, here's the question then. What'd you make? I mean, what was your recipe?
I experimented over the time. I was never very good, but it was Ed's favorite flavor, which is free.
Free and cold. There you go. So on that, I got to see Lieutenant Sharp and then I think Lieutenant Commander Select Sharp on deployment, really setting the tone for the team, like precision, collaboration. Hey, we're in this together, and it's what I think ended up, building and building and building, and he ends up, being the director of one of the nation's largest intelligence organizations. But throughout that time, Bob, I was going to ask you, like, how did you scale Bob Sharp, the targeteer, to Bob Sharp, the director of NGA, or the commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence, or the SOCOM J2? Tremendous responsibilities, and don't have the time necessarily to pick up the ensign and just have a great conversation and help that ensign, get on his way or her way, towards a successful career. How did you scale yourself?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ed. And for one thing, Ed knows this story, but for you, Ian, I only signed up for 2 years in the Navy, and every time I take another set of orders, my wife would hold up 2 fingers and she'd say, "It's been a little longer than 2 years." And I certainly didn't envision staying in 34, and I certainly didn't envision, being a flag officer at some point. It was never on my horizon, as I would just go from tour to tour and just think, well, if I could do one more thing, here's what I'd love to do something like this. And somehow that door would open up, and it was a pretty interesting series of events, but the targeting thing was really core to early days experiences and shaped who I was. But the scaling thing, I really felt it when I went from my second to last tour was Commanding Office of Naval Intelligence, which is about 1,500 people, and to directing National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is about 15,000 people, geographically dispersed. So there was a scaling thing, and the big challenge was still figuring out how you communicate at a personal level, still having a personal touch in connecting with a geographically dispersed workforce. But some of the things that work when you're a squadron AI still work when you're leading to the big organization, it's carving out time every day to walk around. I would call it walkabout. I'm on walkabout and would make my staff nervous, right? They're like, where's he going? Makes people nervous, like trying to call ahead of me. I'm like, no, I just want to see people and talk to them. And then I also encourage leaders at every level to do that. And then also to do one other thing, which is taking time at least once a day to make somebody know how special they are on the team. And that works with small organizations and it works with large organizations as well. But the big challenge is figuring out how you continue to communicate effectively, like how you scale, aligning the team and making sure we're all heading in the same direction. But some of the fundamentals never change.
So that's on the leadership part, and it's awesome. And I've been lucky enough to kind of ride in your wake for a while. The other aspect of it is, I think, from in the varying roles you've done, even up to fairly senior levels, involved heavily in very tactical operations, from intelligence support to some very specific operations, especially in the special operations community. But then also having to grow into supporting operation, what the military calls operational strategic level warfare. How do you scale across those? I see a lot of junior officers struggle with that. And I think, in our careers and across the military, there are sort of building blocks that the military puts in front of you, but it's always a struggle. I always found myself like wanting to run back to that tactical level and get in there and frankly have some fun, because you see the instantaneous results often. Just curious on your thoughts on like how you grew across those seams as well.
I tried to pursue opportunities like every other tour that would put me in some situation where I was back in applications of intelligence, right? And how we not only do the business of intelligence, but how we apply it either to make really important decisions or support important operations. And to me, I derive a lot of joy in that, right? There's, as you were saying, there's instantaneous feedback. And then as you in between those tours, I always look for an opportunity where I could grow myself professionally and understand how the totality of what is very complex Department of Defense and intelligence community and international partnerships, how all those things come together. And as you know very really well, when things are right, those are very well aligned, right? What we're doing tactically and operationally and strategically, hopefully is very aligned in time and space. It's just different perspectives of what we're trying to accomplish, different roles and responsibilities in executing common goals. And I've always encouraged junior officers, as I've been mentoring them, to take that sort of bounce back and forth. And then going back to leadership, I'm a believer in being lifelong learners and organizations that are lifelong learners. And when I get to a new command, I spend time up front doing town halls and just introducing myself and talking about my leadership philosophy. And one of the things I tell all the teams is we will invest in our humans in two ways. We will invest in everybody to grow themselves as professionals, like to be the very best blank, fill in the work role. Like all work roles matter. If you think there's work roles on this team that don't matter, let me know what they are. I'll have them stay home for a while and then I'll count down to when you start screaming, right, that something's not happening. So we invest in everybody as professionals and we invest in everybody as leaders. And you don't have to have people assigned to you to be a leader. Every day, every moment is an opportunity to learn about leading and grow yourself as a leader. And that's been my joy, consistent joy throughout my career is being around great people, doing important things, focused on doing those, investing in ourselves and accomplishing mission.
I was going to interrupt you. Oh, my turn, Pat. No, my turn, please. You have too many questions. Come on, sir. I'm jealous of this opportunity for you guys to hang out.
I'm a big fan, often listener to the podcast for obvious reasons.
Well, long-time fan, first-time caller. Is that what we're saying right now?
First-time caller, yeah. First time I've been invited on. But I saw like the first time that Ed came in as a guest moderator
with retired Marine Corps Colonel Ed Sully. Yeah.
And when he was on, and then with Admiral Pyle, I think, or
oh, you were on that one too. I forgot.
Early on, you were having to get Ed to like jump in. With us, we know each other well. We will take over this conversation if you don't jump
I'm
in,
lucky
Ian.
to be here, and yet we're all sailors, and yet somehow I can't even get in. Well, I want to go deeper that may satisfy Pat Eye's mission drive by digging into some of the military battlefield elements of what you were just describing. One of the questions I asked, I'll say another friend of the pod, Lieutenant General retired Bob Ashley, was how intel has changed the most over his career. About not the question I'm going to ask you. I'm going to assume, therefore, the people have heard his answer, and I'm going to build on his explanation of how intel has changed to respond to something you just described, the relationship between intel and operations. We were just speaking about that a moment ago. And obviously, everyone wants it to be synchronized. I learned from a phrase from another podcast with Pat Eye that I'm going to try to quote this accurately. There's no such thing as a intelligence success. There's only operational successes and intelligence failures, or something like that. That there's this concept that intelligence decision-making drives the actual effects of what happens at the front lines. And so in that dynamic, in that relationship between intel and the operators broadly, how have you seen that relationship change over the past, say, 20, 30 years? What is the most significant transformation you've seen in the relationship between intel and ops?
I think it's changing in a positive way, in that there's more understanding of what intelligence could and should be providing and how it needs to be integrated with operations and intelligence. And I was shaped early on from this sort of exposure. And so my first assignment after going through intel school was to make my way to LA. First, make my way to San Jose to get married at Moffett. Then make my way down to Los Angeles and out to Diego Garcia to jump on the USS Ranger CV-61 on deployment. And it was during the Cold War, still at the end of the Cold War. So I experienced kind of the Cold War deployments. I would tell people we'd come back across the Pacific. We went through something called the Bear Box. And the Bear Box was where the Soviet Union would launch long-range aviation aircraft designated Bears, Bears D and Bears F, like reconnaissance, anti-ship cruise missiles on these things. And we would launch Goose and Mav off the pointy end and have them go intercept out at 200 miles beyond, which was outside missile range. And that was kind of my first, introduction to being in the fleet. But then during turnaround cycles, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And as a stellar intelligence officer, I was asking myself, like, who is Saddam Hussein and where in the world is Kuwait? But we learned pretty quickly, and we did an accelerated turnaround cycle, and we went out and we sailed through the Strait of Hormuz the night before Desert Storm started. So my first assignment included Desert Storm and support to combat operations. And I saw how important it was to have ops and intel integrated during conflict. I had witnessed like the relationship peacetime, and then witnessed it during combat when it was really important and impactful. And that shaped my career, that experience. It was a formative experience. And interestingly enough, based off of lessons learned from Desert Storm, naval intelligence invested in growing some specific skill sets. And one of those skill sets was targeting officers. Like, we needed people who were really good at targeting. At the national level, the intelligence community went through lessons learned from Desert Storm, and lessons learned from Desert Storm led to the creation of National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So it was like when I became 7th director, it was everything coming full circle in my career. But Ops Intel, the way I've always described it and been an advocate for the importance of that integration throughout my career, is I would tell you that the age-old question is, does Intel drive Ops or does Ops drive Intel? And the only correct answer is yes, in support of commanders' objectives and guides. And if you think about this, intelligence without operations or planning or some sort of decision making is just trivia, or it's just like interesting facts. And then operations or planning without intelligence is dangerous, right? So it needs to be integrated from conception through execution, like every facet of what we do in military planning and execution. And I encourage other intelligence professionals to do this as well. I spent a lot of my career trying to help demystify our profession. Right? Just because people who, if they don't understand what intelligence is, how we derive information, how we steal secrets and process it, there's almost this, wave of the hand saying, well, you just like know stuff. And I would always start a conversation like, well, how do you think I would know that? I have to see it or smell it or hear it, or somebody needs to tell me about it. And my intent in that conversation is to demystify it and let operators know that intelligence itself is an operation. There's engineering involved, there's technology involved, and once you describe it in terms that are very familiar to them, now you're an integrated team, right? Because now it's not just something that somebody else does, it's something that we do collectively. So we're in a much better place, I think. On the Navy side, we have the advent of the information warfare community. It's being recognized as a mainstay warfighting discipline. Just this last year, they made information warfare community unrestricted line. Just recently, the 3-star uniformed individual who runs acquisition for the Navy was selected from Nav War. So it's always been historically somebody from the submarine, aviation, and surface warfare community. For the first time, Vice Admiral Seiko Okano just took over, and she is from the information warfare community. So it's being realized as something that's like not just nice to have, it's something that is necessary for us to optimize all of these fantastic weapon systems and platforms that we invest in.
Your words are giving me this hypothesis that I'd love to ask you gentlemen both. It's going to be a stupid idea, but I'd love, so that I'm exposing myself to humble weakness here and let you tell me that I'm way off on this one. But I have the sense, given what you just shared about the relationship between intel and ops, that during peacetime, there can be revolutions in intel, more so than evolutions. But during warfare, there is revolutions in ops, because you're going to figure out a better way to stay alive when you're in harm's way. And I think right now in America, in what I broadly describe as more peaceful times, while the rest of the world may have more active wars, there happens to be this commercial transformation, things like AI, that is leading to revolutionary changes in how kids do homework and how soldiers go out in the field. It is changing whether you like it or not. I don't know, though, if that revolution in intel and tooling and ops and what's standard in the business intelligence world, let alone military intelligence world, I'm not sure those revolutions are necessarily happening at the American ops side. If anything, I think it's maybe a criticism. There is this sense of reticence, perhaps, in great power competition, where I think a lot of people know that something very dangerous may happen in the future, but we're not going to invest in it too much now. We'll wait to see what happens. You can also say, perhaps, quoting back to Freedom's Forge, a very famous book, the true revolution in the industrialization of American warfare happened after we were invaded. It didn't happen before, even if there were warning signs for it. And so that's the question to you both in that kind of evolution, revolution, intel ops. I feel like there's this flip-flop right now where there's like revolutionary intel changes, not ops changes, broadly my civilian perspective, but I think that would change if there was a true kinetic fight. What do you think about that hypothesis?
So yeah, I'm a fan of Freedom's Forge as well, and I don't disagree with it. Like, we have a tendency to be reactive, and in some ways hedging, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is extremely expensive. Hardware, software, hypersonic missiles, all these kind of things that are coming into play take a long time to develop, probably too long, but also we have a tendency to strategically hedge. Where Intel comes in on that, to me, is the indications and warning at the strategic and operational levels. Are we penetrating and understanding where an adversary is building not just capability, but maybe the intent to use that capability? In a good rubric, I think Intel is heavily informing not only that indications and warning at that strategic level, but also what we need to program for, what we need to build to either counter or create advantage over it. It's this sort of, balancing act. And unfortunately, historically, a lot of countries, including us, have gotten it wrong and had to be purely reactive. So I'm kind of interested in what the Admiral's thoughts are on that. I was just in '06, so.
Still fighting to get Ed to call me Bob, not the Admiral, since we've known each other forever and I've been retired over 3 years now, Ed.
I don't call him Bob, but I will call him Fun Bobby, which was one of his call signs.
There may be a question. involved in that in the future at some point. Let me go back to this though and build on the conversation. First of all, it's not a dumb question at all, and there are very few dumb questions. And this is actually a very timely and relevant and important question though. It's not only not a dumb question, it's like the furthest thing from that. Let me take it from two perspectives. One is just evolutionary, revolutionary, and kind of that theme. And then I'll go back to the ops intel, how it's kind of impacting those sorts of commitments or capabilities and investments and things. So at one point, prior to the pandemic, but I was already director of NGA. I was out in the UK and speaking to a group of geospatial folks, military focused, international audience and participation, mainly Five Eyes, but a lot of other great European nations. And I started off by talking about the strategic environment in just those terms, in evolution, revolution. And I said, to me, there has been this evolutionary dimension and revolutionary dimension to changes that we're all experiencing now in the strategic environment. The evolutionary aspect of it to me is this return to great power competition. It is the advancements that we're seeing within warfighting and weaponry, the capabilities themselves, which are becoming more lethal, more precise, longer range, the availability of that sort of hardware and technology to a broader range of people, right? And both nation state and non-nation state actors. I would call them not new domains, but domains that have been around, like space has been around for a while, cyber has been around for a while, but it's just becoming more involved and integrated in everything we do, and it's becoming more congested and contested, which has impacted the strategic environment. And then the fact that the world is becoming like more interconnected daily. And when I was the director of intelligence for Special Operations Command, I would quite often just remind people like there's no such thing as local problems anymore, right? They all cross national boundaries, regional boundaries, and they have this sort of global dimension to them, requiring global perspective and global approaches. On the revolutionary side, I think it is really these new disruptive emerging technologies that are going to change considerably how we do business or are capable of doing business. So quantum, AI, availability of sensing, communications, 5G, all these sorts of things that are coming that are really going to revolutionize how we interact with technology. And as you well know, sometimes people think of those technologies independently, but they're also interconnected. And figuring out how we develop those capabilities, those technologies, how we take advantage of those technologies faster and better than our adversaries is to me the heart of strategic competition, right? It is being best and fastest and leading in those technologies, because the technology itself is just technology. It's available, right, to all nations, non-nation states, everybody. So to me, that is the heart of our competition. And the fact that we have competitors who understand the value of that potential technology, that we have competitors that understand what has been core to the business I've been in, like sensing, sense making, understanding what's happening where with speed, accuracy, and precision, has always been something that we do better than any other nation. But we have competition space now. To me, that's at the heart of everything we're doing. So I think, the understanding that those dynamics is really important as we're making decisions. On the ops intel side of the house, I do think there's this sense of urgency never goes away from intelligence, right? Or at least for those that do it, because on a daily basis, you're being asked what happened yesterday, what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, what's happening 5 years from now, what's happening 10 years from now. So day in and day out, you are operating as an enterprise, and part of that daily discussion on what do we know today that we didn't know yesterday, what are we projecting for tomorrow, also involves, or it should involve, critical, self-reflection. Like, how good were we? How good are we? How good will we be? So there's this constant striving, I think, for immediacy, for getting better and adopting technology and evolving. And as you were saying, with some on weapon systems development or something that isn't necessarily being employed today, when you get into what can we defer, there's sometimes that creeps into those discussions because you're betting on the come of like when are we really going to need that? Do we have more time? Do I have something that's more critical to me today, like readiness of my forces? So it's a different sort of decisions that go into that. But I will tell you on the intelligence side of the house, there's at least an active discussion decision on how do we get better and things. There's also some level of discussion saying, hey, we don't need as much of that right now.
Let me ask about that. That's actually, I guess, my last question on the defense market before I give it over to Ed to ask his final question, which I hope is deeply embarrassing to parts of your youth. But on the forefront,
I'm too old to be embarrassed these days.
That's a good line. I haven't earned that level of wisdom yet. I still care too much.
You're a
but
young
I
buck.
think I'm working on it. I got some gray. I'm getting there. I want to talk about investments, and I think that's what you were just alluding to. So while with deep recognition that we're in a public and highly unclassified environment right now, as you look at global threats, what do you think should be prioritized for intelligence investments and resources?
That's a good question. As director of NGA was my last job, I was emphasizing the criticality of how we sense, how we make sense, how we automate that, how we optimize those sorts of things. And I think you see that still as an emphasis area from the current director and from heads of other agencies. Right. And as director, I was emphasizing to people that we have competitors who are trying to get better at our business than us, and we couldn't allow that to happen. Right? We couldn't let somebody else be better at speed, accuracy, and precision than us, because if speed, accuracy, and precision are on your side, it's a very good day. If they're not, then it's a very bad day. And I experienced this from going back to Desert Storm. The Iraqis did not know they were in a tank war, right? Until their tanks were blowing up, because we could see further, we had longer range. So that investing in those sorts of capabilities, but being an advocate or educating people on the fact that those sorts of capabilities that provide that fidelity of information need to be invested in is where we need to make sure that we don't lose any ground. And I would quite often ask in those sort of JADC2 concepts, right, or use a different acronym, but it still starts with how do you know where things are? How do you hold them at risk? How do you apply forces against them? It really starts with that. How do you know where things are? So there were 4 things that I was emphasizing, which I still think are very relevant. One underpins everything we do, which is being able to deliver assured positioning, navigation, and timing. And a lot of people who don't understand what that is have asked me questions like, is that important? I'm like, yes, it is. Like, well, who uses it? Is that a Department of Defense thing or an intelligence community thing? My response is, no, it's a thing. It's a strategic capability, like our banking system operates on that. And as you well know, that was never at risk in global war on terrorism in that fight. It's a completely different threat and environment when you're talking about Russia or China or whoever, right? So that underpins everything we're doing. The other 3 things I think that are really important are interconnected, and it is partnering with machines to do 2 things. One is to improve workflows, analytic workflows in how we consume data, how we process data, how we focus the human mind, leverage machines to do what machines do best so that people can do what they do best, which is think critically. It is partnering with machines on the other side of an intel process, which is to optimize collection. Like where are you gathering data? How do you make individual systems function as system of systems? And then I say they're interconnected because to modernize how we're doing analytic workflows, to modernize how we're doing collection orchestration, you need to be very deliberate about data and where you're processing it, where you're making sense out of it. Every time you're touching data, making sense out of it for the most time critical, most important use, and then moving it on to aggregate it and make sense out of it in different ways. So I think those sorts of things in automating, optimizing collection orchestration, delivering position navigation timing are still really important to what we're doing.
Well, I'm certainly glad I'm working on at least one of those. I was nervous for a second, but apparently I'm without any endorsement, proud to at least be relevant to a strategic priority. But let's talk more. Let's end on the personal side, Pat. Last question over to you.
Actually, I got a couple questions. Quick hit ones. And these Bob will get the context. You won't, but maybe he'll explain the context. But before I get into those quick hits, Bob, you mentioned being a lifelong learner. What are you most excited about learning about today, whether it's technology and some of the things you just hit on, or policy or leadership? Where's Bob spending his time learning?
What I love, and this is going back to what you were saying, Ian, TurbineOne is absolutely in the middle of something like really important, which is why I'm an advisor with the team. What you spend your time doing matters. And when I was introduced to the team, it was one of those moments where I'm like, well, I not only like what you're doing, I like how you're doing it, and I know the importance of it. So TurbineOne is in the middle of collection orchestrations, making individual system of systems at the speed of relevancy and all these things. And going back to the broader thing, being able to get involved in some of these companies that are working these really important technologies to help us compete and stay ahead is one of my passions in retirement. My other passion is just still my connection to humans and leading and mentoring and inspiring.
Awesome. Okay. Second to last question. What superhero would you be and why?
So Ed knows this story. So I would always ask this question as an icebreaker. I actually asked it at General Bob Ashley's town hall when I was Captain Sharp running the JIC underneath his tutelage, and he came over to speak to the Joint Intel Center, and he spoke, and then he got to questions, and he said, any questions? And there's like everybody's afraid to ask the first question. So I asked him that question, and without skipping a beat, he said Batman. And he said, Batman, because Batman has no superhero powers. Although we argue and debate whether or not being like filthy rich is a superpower, right? And affording technology. But
He
said
inherited that technology, though. That's a very different
yeah,
category in Silicon Valley.
that's
To
true.
be clear.
He was born into wealth. But what he liked is he said, I'd be Batman because he doesn't really have superpowers, but he uses technology and fights evil. I'm like, that's a really good answer. But I got asked that question when I was doing my first GeoInt symposium, which is a fairly big gathering, but it was caveated a little bit because Marvel Comics was doing some sponsorship, there was a speaker from Marvel Comics. So I got asked if you could be any Marvel comic superhero, which one would you be and why? So I had to like shuttle around, and it's funny because the first thing that popped into my head was Deadpool, and then I sat there thinking, I probably shouldn't say Deadpool. Like, because there's press and everything, like a video recording. And so without thinking, I say Captain America, which is a much, different answer. And then I got off stage and I went back, and my personal staff was in the back, and they said, sir, when you were asked that question, we were sitting back here saying, don't say Deadpool. Don't say Deadpool.
I mean, you kind of, I mean, the haircut has that, you have associations of your haircut, sir, with other Marvel superheroes that have the same haircut. So that would have been what I would have gone. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward. I mean, with at least with my haircut, I'm clearly, just to put it out there, there's not a lot, I'm trying to be Tony Stark, to be clear, which is kind of the same Batman-y theme of not naturally born with any superpowers, but, something in that tech direction, maybe more Jarvis than Tony Stark.
But uses advanced technology, right?
I'm trying it. This is me humble bragging my way into that association. We'll see if it gets picked up by anybody. Okay, final question, Pat.
Bob, amongst all of your call signs that I know about, and probably ones I don't know about, what's your favorite and why?
I'm going to go back to your statement. It's Fun Bobby. So my call sign, when I got to the air wing, we were on sail deck, right? We went up to, Ed, you were there. It was fairly new. I flew out and I met the ship, and we went up to Vancouver, which is gorgeous, right? It's a great place to be. And we were sitting around the hotel room and having some adult beverages, and the conversation led to like, hey, Sharps knew what we need to give him. He doesn't have a call sign. He was a ship's company guy before. We need to give him a call sign. And somebody suggested Razor, right? And they said, hey, his name's Sharp. We should call him Razor, like Razor Sharp. We had a guy who flew the S3, and he was a land signals officer, CAG LSO, call sign Whale Peterson, who was quite a character. And Wales, he said without hesitation, he said, no. He's like, Razor is way too cool. If anybody should be called Razor, I should be called Razor. He said, I think his call sign needs to be BS. Get it? That's his initials, BS, and he's an Intel guy. So my first call sign was BS, but over time, I got switched to Fun Bobby. So I adopted Fun Bobby, and I still have people that just call me Fun.
I have a sense that there's a part of that story that you're not telling for the mass audiences, and that's probably a good sign that we're going to call it quits at this point. Very special thank you again with great gratitude to Bob Sharp, whose extraordinary career continues to inspire many generations of folks working to serve those at the front line. Bob, thank you so much for joining Defense Disrupted.